Starting us off at number 5, Beauty and the Beast. Beauty and the Beast is one of Disney's tales that was recently retold via a live-action adaptation. While it had its differences, much of the story still sung the same tune. But the original story that it's based off of isn't as joyful. Written by Gabrielle Suzanne Barbat de Villeneuve, Belle, after being taken in by the Beast, convinces him to let her visit her sisters for a week. The sisters, who now have a luxurious lifestyle, sway Belle into staying with them a little bit longer. Of course, this doesn't bode well with the Beast. He goes mad, hunts her down, and then devours her. So yeah, not quite the love story that we all know the Disney classic to be. I think I'll pass on that.
Coming in at number 4, Mulan. There's been a lot of excitement and criticism concerning the upcoming live-action Mulan film. A lot is changing from the original animated version, which has some fans a tad irked, so you could say. Regardless of how you feel about it, it's undeniable that it's a movie that will attract a large audience when it's released. But did you know that the story behind Mulan is actually much more tragic than what appears in the animated film? So Disney's version follows Mulan, a girl who is pals with a small dragon, and a cricket who ends up pretending to be a man in order to fight in the Chinese army facing off against the Huns. She wins the war and goes back home. Happy ending. But the Hua Mulan poem that it's based on, China loses the war. The Khan then encounters Mulan and tells her that he'll let her live if she lives with him. She plays along but eventually escapes, returning home, only to discover her beloved father is now dead and that her mum has remarried. She then kills herself to be with her father. That's some dark stuff.
Up next at 3, The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid tells the tale of Ariel, the daughter of the King of the Sea, who just wants to walk where the people walk. After falling in love with Prince Eric, she strikes up a deal with Ursula, and after a hefty amount of conflict, she does end up living happily ever after. Now, Hans Christian Andersen chose a different fate for Ariel in his version of the story. In Ariel's deal in this tale, part of the agreement is that her legs will hurt all the time, which feels as if she's walking on knives. Because of her constant pain, things don't go as she hoped, and the prince ends up falling in love with another lady. Ariel, utterly heartbroken, throws herself into the sea and transforms into sea foam, which doesn't seem like it's a pleasant fate. Bunch of foam in the water. Nah, that's not how a love story goes.
Swinging in now at number 2, Cinderella. The Disney Cinderella film was released in 1950, but the Cinderella story is actually much older than that. There is actually a whole history of variations of the story throughout the centuries, with over 500 from Europe alone. The one with the most similarities to the Disney one though originated in the 17th century in Italy. 60 years later, that story was retold in a French tale, and then after that the brothers Grimm retold it yet again in the 19th century. In this one, rather than glass, Cinderella's slippers are made of gold. When the prince comes round to test out women's feet to see who the slippers fit, Cindy's stepmom orders her stepsisters to cut off their toes so that their feet will slide into the slipper seamlessly. Wow. That plan doesn't work though, and when Cinderella marries the prince, the stepsisters are forced to attend the wedding, where they are further mutilated by pigeons who pick out their eyes. Wow.
And finally, in our number 1 spot, Snow White. The brothers Grimm have told many a grim tale, puns, including Snow White. And just like Cinderella, Snow White has been retold countless times, including in an animated short by the Fleischer brothers starring Betty Boop, in which the whole tale acts as a metaphor for female empowerment. And cocaine. Can't forget the drugs. It was the early 30s, people. Anywho, the brothers Grimm tale has a few stark differences, one being that the evil queen is a whole lot more evil. She regularly feasts on the innards of women who are fair, so that she can be fair. Guts that the huntsman actually collects for her. Now, when Snow White is rescued by the prince, she's actually still unconscious, and when he takes her back home with him, with her being unconscious, it's only because her casing hits a rock that she's jolted awake. But I guess she's like, okay, cool, I'll hang out with this prince, because the two then get married, and the evil queen is forced to dance in hot iron shoes at their wedding, until she dies of exhaustion. Not really the kind of entertainment that you'd want at your wedding though, is it?
Kicking off the list at number 5, Monsters Inc. Now of course I'm going to start with an obvious contender. Monsters Inc. was released in 2001 by Disney Pixar, directed by Pete Docter, and stars John Goodman and Billy Crystal. This family fun monster tale took the monsters that were hiding in your closet and saw what was on the other side. And it turns out the monster world is in the middle of a scare crisis, so they have to rely on the scarers to go and get energy from the screams of children. Now this movie of course has real horror elements in it. First of all, they're monsters who try and scare kids. That's their jobs, that's their 9 to 5, is to ruin kids' lives. So even though they may sound like Steve Buscemi, they're still pretty frightening for a kid. Like I remember when I saw this, I was in 1st grade. You know what part gave me nightmares the most? The part where the dude's lips get sucked like off of his face. What a nightmare. My lips were so chapped growing up, that hits way too close to home. That dude wins the Kylie Jenner lip challenge, hands down. Hands down. So fat and fast, it's crazy. This movie's quite funny, obviously. I mean, with John Goodman as Sully and Billy Crystal as Mike, the two actors are comedic powerhouses. And after the movie's release, literally everybody recognized their voices. Now, if I watch The Big Lebowski, I just hear those monsters talking. Like if I was watching it and not looking, I would hear Mike Wazowski. That's it, or not Mike Wazowski. I would just hear Sully and Randall just talking and arguing the entire time. It's great, you gotta try it. But there are many theories that pin Monsters, Inc. as a horror film. And I'm here for it. For starters, one of the biggest clues we have is actually spotted in a Toy Story short film titled Partysaurus Rex. Now before we show you that part, we gotta cover one thing first. So in Monsters Inc., Randall is explaining to Sully that humans are the monsters the whole time, and they make toilet seat covers out of our monsters' fur. Alright, so lock that in, you got it? Cool, sweet. Cut to Toy Story 2's Partysaurus Rex. Released in 2012, there's a part where Bonnie is playing with Rex in the bathtub, and for a brief moment you can see the toilet seat, and it is, in fact, the same fur as James P. Sullivan himself. Check it out. While it's not a shocker that humans suck both in real life and in the Disney life, it is quite alarming considering these movies have been known to be part of the Pixar theory, which is another video for another time. I don't have enough oxygen for that one right now. The movie ends with the monsters turning to comedy to get reactions, using laughs instead of screams, which I feel like they should have just tried first. I don't know. I feel like this is still scary though. Like imagine you're sound asleep and then a monster with 30 eyeballs is like, hey, how we doing? Any anniversaries here tonight? I would wake up and my bed. I would faint right off the bat. That's not that much better. Also, all of these doors in that factory, each door leading to a different place in the human world. Like, of course we saw the answer to the question, what if a child got in there? And it's quite fun. But this is a very scary place to be. Like if this was live action, it would look more like the closing scene in Cabin in the Woods. That's just a place you don't want to stumble across, period. We're seeing a closer look at what the monsters get up to with Monsters at Work premiering on Disney Plus sometime in 2021. Number 4, James and the Giant Peach. I'm hoping that as I read that title, most of you sitting watching said, ah, of course. James and the Giant Peach is a kids movie, I think. That was released in 1996, directed by Henry Selick. It tells the sad, very, very sad tale about a boy named James, an orphan rather, who lives with his 2 mean aunts. That is until, and the title may have given it away, he, yes, finds a giant peach filled with bug friends and he heads for New York City. New York, New York, bring your bugs and your ants. As a child, I never liked this movie. The blend between the stop motion and real life just confused me as a kid. Like I couldn't tell what the difference was between like fake and real scenes when I was that young. So some scenes just straight up scared me. Even at happy parts of the film, happy, I'll say in quotations, like when James and the spider catch the evil ants, it's supposed to be a good part. Like, yeah, we did it team, we made it, and these crazy ladies are getting what they got coming to them. Unfortunately, that scene is nightmare fuel. Like that's a scary looking scene. Like I'm just looking at it and it's scary. That's what horror is. Even the police officers in the crowd are watching like, what the f***? Like, it's a lot. This movie has similar notes to Nightmare Before Christmas, which I may or may not get into later. The creepy musical stop motion elements are not only impressive, but also pretty fun. Of course, this is a Disney movie, so it's mostly a good time. Randy Newman did the music for it, so it sounds like Toy Story. It sounds fun. But with Tim Burton being one of the producers, with even a cheeky little Jack Skellington cameo, that plus the fact that this is based off of a Roald Dahl novel from the early 60s, it just has to be creepy in a way. The writing, the stop motion, the actual story itself, it's so old and weird and specific and weirdly poetic, and also just scary. This movie is a horror movie. We can't just slap the word Disney on it, throw a few monologues about growing up, and then call it a family film. Like we literally get 3 minutes into the movie and the family's laying on a beach, looking at clouds, pointing, giggling, they're having a great time. His parents are laying next to him, they have like a picnic. Then the narrator's like, oh, and then an angry rhinoceros appeared out of nowhere and gobbled up his poor mother and father. Their troubles, if they had any at all, were over in 35 seconds flat. What? What the hell kind of movie? Like, the dude even said the amount of seconds it took for them to die. That is so specific. This kid should have become Batman. Like, what a horrible origin story. They even had the audacity to include a nightmare scene, as if this movie wasn't already a nightmare in itself. Like, dude, come on, I'm 4 years old. I'm so scared. Also, don't even get me started on that pirate ship scene. Number 3, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Disney Animation presents Groping, the musical. Yeah, this movie is different. Released in 1996, The Hunchback of Notre Dame is an animated film based off the classic novel from 1831 with the same name, written by Victor Hugo. So, taking place in the 15th century Paris, we have a hunchback named Quasimodo, who was nearly killed when he was a baby by Frollo, the Minister of Justice. He acts in the name of God, so after he commits this murderous sin, he decides to spare the child, making him a bell ringer and locking him away in the meantime. Nothing helps a bad back like yanking a 13-ton bell, you know? To make it better, let's just yank this ship. So one day, Quasimodo is made a fool in public. He decided to sneak into the town festival and have a good old time. The guards started making fun of him, and in comes a gypsy. Like, for real, they call her a gypsy like 100 times. This movie is insane. Her name is Esmeralda. The Minister of Justice is super creepy towards her. Now, if you hadn't seen this movie or heard of it, and I just started to describe the plot, you would think, oh, this is for sure an M. Night Shyamalan film. He's super creepy. Even his musical parts are so weird and off-put. Also, this movie is about being horrible to deformed people. Like, off the bat, he doesn't want this kid because of the way he looks. So we see a murderer try and get rid of a baby based on its appearance. Now, of course, he gets his hands on the big bad evil gypsy woman, but it doesn't last long. Quasimodo gets hyped up by his friends, and then he saves the day. So yeah, he gets real angry, breaks from his chains. This is a great moment in the movie. The music in this part is just epic. It actually sounds like the music from Step Brothers when Will Ferrell looks at the drum kit. So yeah, this scene's great. He swoops down, grabs Esmeralda, Spider-Man swings to the church, and then screams, "Sanctuary!" This is good fun and all, but like, they were about to burn a chick in front of everybody. And they were all on board, the entire town. They're like, yep, let's see this burning, let's do it. If this wasn't animated, it would be Game of Thrones. End of story. Number 2, Toy Story. That's right, coming in next is not only Toy Story, but the entire Toy Story franchise. Yep, I couldn't decide. I've read many theories about the Toy Story franchise, and I'm here for them all. First of all, what are the main points of this franchise? Well, a kid gets a toy, that toy is alive, and sneaks around in hopes of not getting caught. Ah, cool. Sounds like you're describing Chucky though, Taylor. These movies are just fun versions of Chucky. I said it, that's it. At the end of Toy Story 1, they teach Sid a lesson. Oh, how, you ask? Trauma. They give Sid many, many years of trauma. Like, sure, Sid was being kind of a and they had to tell him to chill out, but like, I did stuff like that when I was younger. Who didn't? So we see all the toys do this theatrical production of The Walking Dead, and they scare Sid as a lesson. Like, these movies are so fun. Probably my favorite franchise from Disney Pixar. But in Toy Story 2, the nightmare scene? Yeah, I was 5 years old. Come on. Also, Toy Story 3, Lotso Huggenbear straight up has a scary baby sidekick. That's already enough. Like, that's it. They accepted their fate at the end of that movie. They accepted the fact that they're going to die, and they made sure to hold hands and smile and look at each other right before they do. This is a horror film. Toy Story 4, also a horror film. The entire time, like, all of Toy Story 4 is just a horror film. Every time that ventriloquist dummy came on screen, he's walking all weird, he's like, bah. My shoulders kept cocking up. I didn't like it. The horror elements in that movie are practically invisible to a young eye, but seeing it as an adult, it's scary. As soon as we met Gabby, we all knew something evil was afoot. Like, I thought Toy Story 4 was great. Toy Story 3 was the perfect ending. So when they announced another one, I was like, oh, why are you gonna ruin it? It was fine, I'll say it. The ending is still somehow more sad. I don't know how they could do it. I didn't even know it's possible. And finally, number 1, The Nightmare Before Christmas. This time of the year really is my favorite. You can fly through all the Halloween Town movies, slam them all, boom, done. And then as soon as you're done with all the Halloween classics, you can almost immediately start watching Christmas movies. Yeah, I'm one of those insane people that fires up Home Alone in November. Sue me, what's up? The Nightmare Before Christmas is a rare gem that can be enjoyed anytime from October to December. Released before I even existed back in 1993, directed by the same guy that brought you James and the Giant Peach, Henry Selick, The Nightmare Before Christmas tells the strange tale of what exactly happens when the king of Halloween Town finds Christmas. And it's beautiful. Mostly. Using the voices of Danny Elfman, Catherine O'Hara, and Chris Sarandon, this stop-motion musical was inspired after Tim Burton witnessed a storefront in the process of changing from their Halloween display to a Christmas display. He said something about the reindeer mixed with jack-o'-lanterns just sparked an idea. So, sure, it's fun, and the songs will be stuck in your head for like 28 years, but this movie is a horror film. Hey, if you disagree, you're a ghoul in disguise. Got ya. The opening song gives us an idea of the players we're working with in Halloween Town. The first line, boys and girls of every age, won't you like to see something strange? No man, I'm 2. Boys and girls of every age may be like boys and girls who are over the age of 16 and can tell the difference between what's real and what's fake. Yeah, I don't want to know any of these monsters exist, sir. No thank you. And also, Oogie Boogie, the guy made of bugs? If you can cut from the girl's look to my look, like, that's the same look I had in the theater. Yeah, that was all of our face in the theater when he was like, my bugs, and was melting into lava. Kids weren't laughing, they were covering their face. Wanna know why, Disney? Because as much as I believe that Jack was real and Santa was real, I also believe that these were real too. I've always wanted to see this musical on Broadway, I'll tell you that. I'll choreograph the whole thing, let's do it. I'll even play Jack. I got the lankiness to pull it off.
Kicking off at number 5, The Black Cauldron. Without a doubt, my favourite Disney film ever made, which kind of explains a lot. But when you really rummage through it, The Black Cauldron was an underrated early 80s masterpiece that was completely misinterpreted by the general public. Seriously, this film was torn to shreds and almost bankrupt Disney's animation studios, and because of that, Disney have gone out of their way to make sure that it's forgotten, branding it the black sheep of their animated canon. Do you want to know something even more terrifying? The Care Bears movie was more of a commercial success than this poor guy. Talk about salt in the wound. The Black Cauldron has no musical sequences, one of the few Disney films not to do so. Instead, it has one of the most haunting, creepy, and masterful musical scores ever made. It's dark and gloomy in all the right places, reflecting the animation's bleak and unfiltered style. This film isn't bright, it isn't colourful, and its source material is drawn from some seriously dark fiction. The Black Cauldron is loosely based on the Chronicles of Prydian by Lloyd Alexander, a series of novels that pay tribute to the ghouls and spectres of Welsh mythology. And for what was intended to be a kids movie, it really doesn't pull any punches. Disney was so ashamed of it that despite its 1985 cinematic release, it wasn't made available for commercial purpose until 1997, which is where it ended up in the laps of people like me, and we absolutely loved it for the dark, oftentimes disturbing tale that it was intended to be. Coming in at number 4, The Black Hole. Who knew that Disney made a terrifying science fiction horror mashup starring Anthony Perkins, aka the literal Norman Bates? Norman Bates is in a Disney film. Let that sink in, guys. Well, after the success of Star Wars in 1977, pretty much every studio on the face of the earth thought it would be a good idea to make a sci-fi film. And what was Disney's approach? A studio famed for Bambi, Dumbo and the like. They decided to make a dark, cosmic horror riff featuring a mad scientist trying to fly a spaceship into a black hole. Released in 1979, The Black Hole was the first ever Disney feature to receive a PG rating, and PG is pretty generous because not only does it feature a mad scientist, it also depicts an army of faceless robots that are in fact lobotomized humans that tried to mutiny but failed. Some straight up murder, mild cursing and very adult themes. A terrifying demon android named Maximilian, and an ending that is far, far from happy. What the hell, Disney? Next up at number 3, The Watcher in the Woods. Straight up, Disney's first and only intentional horror film. Well, kind of. And while it missed the mark on the whole, it was still jam-packed with some real horror pedigree. It's interesting then that Disney executive Ron Miller publicly pitched this film as Disney's version of The Exorcist. Hey, it was the late 70s, they were struggling for content. Attached to the film was John Hugh, the man responsible for the 1973 cult classic The Legend of Hell House, not Hill House. And for the most part, The Watcher in the Woods was a decent attempt at a supernatural horror flick. But Disney? What's going on, bud? Your audience are children. What were you thinking? The first version of this film featured a bizarre, perplexing ending for what is essentially a haunted house story, and critics tore it to shreds, making Disney think twice about dipping their toe into the chilly pond that is horror cinema. It was later re-released with a completely different ending that tied the whole thing together, and surprisingly, Disney were left with a genuinely creepy and eerie ghost story. But who was going to watch it? No one. Sorry, Disney. The kids weren't ready for it. Swinging in at number 2, Return to Oz.
Dorothy.
And mark my words, this film is terrifying. Straight up. Even if it is a kid's film, Return to Oz creeped the hell out of me as a kid, and it still does now. And what a shock it was to go from Judy Garland's wonderful Wizard of Oz, we're off, to this horrifying, skin-flaying gorgon of a movie. Although Return to Oz was technically a lot more faithful to the L. Frank Baum book set in the magical land of Oz, it was a complete and utter 180 from the tone and visual style of the 1939 classic. And it scared kids so much that there were mass walkouts during its cinematic release. It was conjured up during the so-called Disney dark ages of the 80s where, much like with The Watcher in the Woods, the studio was struggling to interpret exactly what their growing audience wanted. And what do we get? Well, a young insomniac Dorothy Gale getting electroshock therapy in a mental asylum, headless princesses, the deeply disturbing Wheelers who, what the hell, I'll take flying monkeys any day over those guys, and of course a living, breathing collection of women's heads in glass cabinets. It wasn't intended to be, but Return to Oz was possibly one of the scariest Disney films ever made. Although, there is one that takes that title over all others. Finally, coming in at a number 1 spot, Something Wicked, This Way Comes.
You won't be needing her anymore. Look, you have a fine new mother now.
Those poor kids. Disney, what were you thinking? Put it this way, if Something Wicked This Way Comes was released as a Hammer horror film, it wouldn't have felt out of place. Starring a young Jonathan Pryce as the terrifying and mysterious Mr. Dark, the proprietor of a nightmarish and arcane carnival that rolls into the sleepy town of Greentown, Illinois, with the intention of taking over and forcing the townspeople to do his demonic bidding. It's not a happy film at any point. It's a straight up dark and twisted tale of a villain and his victims. Based on the novel of the same name written by Ray Bradbury, Something Wicked was meticulously loyal to its source material, with director Jack Clayton working closely with Bradbury to deliver on its horror-filled plot. Clayton was also responsible for adapting Henry James's horror novella The Turn of the Screw into the 1961 horror classic The Innocents. And that's exactly why Disney picked him up, because he made horror films really well. And that's what this is. It's a horror film and it's genuinely creepy for the most part. And it was made by Disney Studios. Who knew?